everyone, it's MJ, and this week we're continuing our Druid Priestess doll. So we're starting with the sewing, and I'm showing here with my finger just the seams that I'm going to be sewing. I started by sewing together all of the panels for the front of the skirt and all of the panels for the back of the skirt, and then after that I sewed the front and the back together. So here you can see me doing that. And usually when I sew, I do a back tack, but I find when I'm sewing doll clothes that the seam allowance is too small, and with my sewing machine, if I try to back tack on a seam allowance that's that small, it's about 1/8 of an inch, it'll jam. So instead I just tie a knot at the end. And so there's the front and the back all sewn together, and then now I'm sewing the front and the back so that they make one skirt. It went pretty well, I have to say, except I'm not sure if it was a problem with my pattern or if it was transferring the pattern to the fabric and then cutting out the fabric, but my skirt did end up like way too big for my doll. I started to suspect that right around here, but I thought, we'll figure it out. So I did sew it all together, and then afterwards I tried it on my doll, and you'll see in a second that it's like really too big. I'm pinching it with my fingers, and you can see that the doll just doesn't, it's just way bigger than it needs to be. So I went back and I sewed it smaller, and then before I cut any fabric away, I tried it on the doll again, and this time it fit. So I cut away all the excess seam allowance, and then I added a trim to the bottom. Part of what's fun with sewing doll clothes is that because they're so miniature, you can get a really cool trim or a really cool piece of lace, and it can be a really small piece for a regular human garment, but for dolls it makes this like really awesome, cool design feature. So I had this sort of big lace, and I used that as the trim on the skirt, and I think that it ended up adding a lot of visual interest and making the skirt a lot nicer. So next I'm putting together the top, and for that I sew together the shoulder pieces first, and then I put in the sleeve. But the sleeve is too big to fit in the top, so I just sewed one stitch along, knotted it at one end, and then pulled on one of my sewing threads, and that gathered the sleeve so that it was small enough to fit in the sleeve hole that I had in my top. And as you can see here, and that does two things. A, it makes it easier to sew, and B, it actually adds a little bit of a sleeve puff, and because I wanted the priestess to have big sleeves, I think that it works out really well. And then once the sleeve is sewn to the sleeve hole, you just sew along the sleeve and then the side seam of the top. So that's what I did. Originally I had planned to close this top up at the back with a Velcro, but then I realized it opens at the front, so I sew together the back, and it works out well. So this is me just testing it out, making sure that the fit is okay, and it did work out. Because the top crosses over at the front, it's really easy to fit, because if it's too big you just cross it over more. So then I stitched together the hood, and then I fold over the edge of the hood and I sew a little hem, because I didn't want it to be just a raw edge, especially because I'm using the wrong side of the fabric, so I'm using the non-shiny side of the fabric, and I felt that if I left that part of the costume raw, it would be really obvious that you could see this sort of like gold shiny stuff on the inside, which might be cool, but I didn't want that. So then I sewed the hood to the jacket, and I messed up the footage there, so I don't have the footage of that. And once that's done, I add some glitter glue details, and then I put her all together. So here she is without the armor, just all tied up, and I think she actually looks really good. And then here she is with the armor on top. I think I'm still going to add more. I don't think that she's done yet, but I'm really liking the way this doll is going. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.